This is Rummy's Corner. Roberto Duran, Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Marvin Hagler. Fate dealt boxing fans a great hand during the 1980s. Four of the very best boxers in the long, rich history of professional boxing, and four of the greatest champions who competed during the 80s. Making matters even better, fate saw to it that these four elite talents would all cross paths in this era. And this produced some of the greatest and most memorable encounters in boxing history. Indeed, boxing fans from the 80s were truly blessed. On June 20th, 1980, WBC welterweight champion of the world Sugar Ray Leonard squared off against former undisputed lightweight world champion Roberto Duran. When Duran stepped in through the ropes, he appeared to be very fired up and full of intensity. And on the other side, Leonard looked cool, calm, and collected with a far more relaxed demeanor. The fight started with a customary feeling out process. To the surprise of many, Duran was showing a willingness to box with Leonard, and Leonard was showing a willingness to trade with Duran. A pattern began to emerge where Duran was successfully closing the distance and charging in with an attack. Duran was doing some very good work once he was on the inside and was frequently pinning Leonard up against the ropes. Ray was grabbing on and trying to smother the challenger's aggression, but Duran was crafty, and he was managing to fire off shots whenever he could partially free one of his hands from Ray's grasp. Roberto was also throwing some tremendous body shots on the inside. Roberto Duran was dictating the terms of the fight, and Leonard was perfectly willing to fight Roberto on his own terms. But this wasn't something that was working out in Ray's favor. Leonard was doing a good job absorbing the punishment, biding his time, and sometimes firing back with some excellent flurries and stellar counters of his own. But for the most part, the challenger was more aggressive, more active, and more efficient. As the fight progressed into the middle rounds, Leonard began firing more punches, and he started stringing together some longer stretches of success. But Duran was still relentlessly stalking the champion in an effective manner. Things were growing far more competitive, and there was some explosive back and forth action. Both boxers were landing their fair share of punches, and most of these were big punches. Whenever it appeared someone was starting to gain an advantage and build some momentum, the other one would come back with some heavy artillery of his own. It became an absolute showcase of tactical infighting prowess from both combatants. They were both digging in with hard clubbing body shots. They were both throwing with mean intent, and they were both enduring a tremendous volume of punishment for their efforts. It was a grueling war of attrition, and both boxers were frequently trading back and forth ferociously in several vicious exchanges. No matter how relentlessly Duran attacked, Leonard would always eventually fire back, and the two continued battling it out at an incredible pace. There was some absolutely amazing back and forth action as the two stood toe-to-toe for a prolonged close-quarter barrage. Each new assault elevated the already savage level of intensity to new heights. Neither man gave in to the other, and despite the sheer physical brutality of what was happening, these two men were deeply engaged in a mesmerizing battle of wills. In the 15th and final round, both fighters were exhausted, but Leonard seemed to have a little more left in the tank, and he was able to take advantage of the uncharacteristically lethargic Duran by throwing quick, short flurries down the final stretch. There was initially some type of mistake made when the judges' scorecards were first announced. It was declared as a majority decision, but in actuality, Duran was officially awarded the victory by unanimous decision. Final scorecards read 145 to 144, 148 to 147, and 146 to 144, all three in favor of the challenger. Roberto Duran had just become the new WBC welterweight champion of the world, making him a two-division champion in the process. On November 25th, 1980, WBC welterweight champion of the world, Roberto Duran, defended his title in an immediate rematch against the man he beat to become champion, Sugar Ray Leonard. 5 months had passed since their epic first encounter. Early in the rematch, Leonard was using a lot more movement than he had in the previous fight. He was dancing around and making very good use of the ring space. Duran was having difficulty cutting off the ring as Ray kept himself at a safe distance on the outside while firing off the occasional jab. Whenever Duran did manage to back Leonard into the ropes, he quickly slipped away and pivoted back to center ring. This tactical approach to remain on the outside served Leonard well early, and he was already doing a better job neutralizing Duran than he had at any point during their first fight. Leonard continued boxing well from long range. He was doing a better job keeping Duran at bay and firing off with fierce combinations whenever Duran was getting too close for comfort. Leonard was using exceptional movement, and this severely limited Duran's offense. Roberto was throwing some decent shots when the two got in close, but Leonard was often able to minimize the damage from any infighting initiated by Duran. Sometimes, however, Duran was able to keep the action in the pocket for longer stretches, and this is when he was doing his best work. This time around, Leonard was the one dictating the terms of the fight, and Duran was ineffectively trying to close the distance. Leonard was doing a brilliant job, sticking and moving and keeping things on the outside. There were some occasional fireworks erupting whenever the two were in close quarters, but Duran was unable to pin Leonard against the ropes as frequently and effectively as he had during their Montreal brawl. Duran appeared to get more and more frustrated with his inability to keep up with Sugar Ray's impeccable footwork. It had reached a point in round 7 where an extremely confident Leonard began taunting Duran and showboating his defense and quickness. A perturbed and unsettled Duran was desperately trying to close the distance, but Leonard was too fast and too athletic, and the taunting continued. Duran's growing frustration seemed to be fueling Leonard's growing confidence. In round 8, Duran was trying to chase Leonard down and eventually got in close where they became tied up. And then Duran turned around and dismissively waved his hand as Leonard moved in and took a few shots at him. After a brief moment of confusion, the referee instructed the two boxers to fight. But instead, Roberto Duran informed the referee that he did not wish to continue. The fight was over. Sugar Ray Leonard was declared the winner by technical 8th round knockout. At the time of the stoppage, all three judges had Leonard ahead with scores of 68 to 66, 68 to 66, and 67 to 66. Sugar Ray Leonard had just become the new WBC welterweight champion of the world, making him a 2-time welterweight champion. On September 16, 1981, WBC welterweight champion of the world, Sugar Ray Leonard, squared off against WBA welterweight world champion, Thomas Hearns. This unification showdown for welterweight supremacy was a bout that had been building up for quite some time, and both boxers appeared extremely confident in the moments leading up to the contest. Early in the fight, the two had a customary feeling out process, where Leonard was up on his toes dancing around, and Hearns was patiently stalking him. Both fighters were firing off some preliminary jabs, and as they both began settling in, Hearns was winning the early battle of the jabs. He was throwing his jab more frequently, and even with Ray moving around on the outside, Hearns' long arms were still tagging the mark upstairs and downstairs. Hearns was also looking to find an opening for a big right hand, but Leonard was using good evasive movement. This pattern continued, with Hearns patiently pressing forward behind a piston-like jab, and Leonard dancing around and using movement to try and create angles. The building tension erupted in some early fireworks that saw both men landing punches, but Tommy was usually getting the best of these exchanges. Hearns was building momentum, and Leonard was continuing to have difficulties dealing with the long-range jab of the Motor City Cobra. Ray was biding his time and looking for openings, and sometimes firing off a big shot, but he was often just missing the target. With about a minute left in round 6, Leonard finally broke through and he rocked Hearns with a big left hand. Sensing that his foe was hurt, Leonard opened up with a barrage, and in the midst of his attack, Hearns clipped him with a few good right hands that momentarily stopped Leonard in his tracks. But Sugar Ray resumed his assault, and the two boxers traded away furiously. Leonard rallied back and appeared to have Tommy in trouble again, so he opened up with a combination and had Hearns reeling across the ring before the bell sounded to end the 6th. The momentum had shifted in Leonard's favor, and over the next few rounds, the earlier trend in the fight had been completely reversed. Now it was Leonard doing the stalking, and Hearns bouncing around and using movement to stay out of reach. And Hearns started doing an excellent job boxing off the back foot, landing jabs from long range while hopping around on the move. Leonard was having difficulty adjusting to Tommy's new tactics, and Hearns was regaining control of the action. Leonard was still landing some good isolated punches, but Hearns began dictating the rhythm with his jab. The Motor City Cobra had seized the momentum, and he was starting to sneak in some right hands behind a snappy jab. Hearns had by now resumed being the aggressor, and Leonard was trying to fend off his attacks while looking for openings that rarely materialized. Leonard was looking to load up on one huge shot, but Hearns was boxing masterfully, and Leonard couldn't find the big opening he was searching for. About halfway through round 13, Leonard finally struck home, and he hurt Hearns with a big right hand. Leonard immediately pounced and unleashed a prolonged flurry of fast shots that had Hearns in trouble. Ray just kept punching and punching and punching, and Hearns was sent to the ropes by an uppercut and then quickly sent through the ropes, although it was not an official knockdown. But at this point, Hearns was very badly hurt regardless, and Leonard tried to move in for the finish. Hearns landed some desperation bombs as he tried to regain his composure, but Leonard soon had him hurt again with another flurry, and this time when Hearns slipped through the ropes, it was indeed a knockdown. Tommy somehow beat the count, and by then, the round was already over. In round 14, Leonard backed Hearns into the ropes with a jab, and shortly after he landed a booming right hand that rattled Hearns to his core. Leonard raised his hands in triumph, but Hearns somehow managed to stay on his feet. Cool as an assassin, Leonard moved in for the finish, but a brave Tommy Hearns continued doing everything in his power to battle on. but he was completely exhausted, and Ray's spirited attacks had taken their toll. Hearns was too tired to even keep his body upright, prompting referee Davey Pearl to call a halt to the contest, making this a 14th round technical knockout for Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard had just become the undisputed welterweight champion of the world. On November 10th, 1983, undisputed middleweight champion of the world, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, squared off against former 3-division world champion, Roberto Duran. For Hagler, this was his first big-money, high-profile fight under the spotlight during his 3-year reign as champ, and for Duran, it was an opportunity to capture a championship in a 4th weight class. Both combatants started boxing tactically to begin the contest. They were both using a lot of feints and a lot of movement, and they were trying to establish the range to get the jabs working. Hagler and Duran were showing one another a lot of respect, and they were both patiently boxing in hopes that the other would lead and take the initiative. But since both boxers were primarily looking to create counterpunching opportunities, there was a lot of posturing and a lot of maneuvering for position, but not a whole lot of punching. At times, the two boxers would find themselves in close range, and this often produced some intensely heated exchanges that saw both men swinging away. But most of the time, the exchanges were brief, because they were both still embracing tactics designed to create openings for counters. This led to long stretches where Duran and Hagler were both boxing patiently on fairly even terms. But every now and again, they were standing toe-to-toe and brawling in close quarters. During the middle rounds of the fight, Hagler started consistently doing the better work. Duran was still fighting well in spots, but Hagler's strength was on full display, and he was putting his punches together exceptionally well on the inside. The champion was simply overpowering Duran, but for whatever reason, Hagler never really seemed to press the issue. Marvin remained very patient, and while he was unloading whenever he found himself on the inside, he was frequently trying to keep things on the outside, where he showcased his tactical prowess while trying to coax Duran into attacking. Incredibly, there was absolutely no sense of urgency in Hagler's conservative approach. This enabled Duran to begin working his way back into the fight as the two continued tactically battling it out in competitive fashion. Duran was in fact boxing beautifully at times with all of his offensive and defensive skills on display. But Hagler finally turned up the heat to regain control, and he finished the fight strong. Duran was bravely shooting back, but he was enduring a great deal of punishment on the inside, where Hagler was administering some hammer-like shots in close. The sheer physicality of Hagler had worn Duran down, but to his credit, he absorbed everything Hagler threw at him and went the full 15-round distance in a competitive affair. When the verdict was announced, Hagler was awarded a close but unanimous decision victory. The official scorecards were 144 to 142, 146 to 145, and 144 to 143, all in favor of the champion. Marvelous Marvin Hagler had just successfully defended the undisputed middleweight championship of the world. On June 15, 1984, WBC Super Welterweight Champion of the World, Thomas the Hitman Hearns, squared off against former 3-division world champion Roberto Duran. This represented somewhat of a crossroads fight for both boxers. Hearns was riding a 6-fight winning streak, and even though Duran was coming off a loss, his stock had risen following his strong effort against Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Early in the bout, both boxers were feeling one another out and looking to establish the jab, and the longer, faster jab of Hearns was giving him an edge early. Hearns was trying to open up on Duran, and he launched an effective attack that soon saw Duran countering back. But Duran didn't have an answer for Hearns' jab and long right hand. With under a minute left in round one, the hitman landed a right-hand bomb that sent Duran down. Duran appeared to be badly hurt, but he was able to beat the count. Cool as an assassin, Hearns strided in for the finish. Tommy unloaded with an all-out assault. Duran somehow managed to remain on his feet after being bounced off the ropes, but he didn't remain upright for long. Hearns proceeded to beat him down again. Duran was quick to rise to his feet, and then the first round had come to a close. Roberto was so dazed and confused that he accidentally went to the wrong corner. Duran appeared loose to start the second, and he tried changing things up a little bit and landed a couple of decent shots. But the long-range jab finder of Hearns was an absolute nightmare for the challenger. Hearns had Duran in trouble once again, and Tommy unloaded with a vicious, prolonged attack. Duran was barely able to defend himself, and he eventually held on. But Hearns was soon all over him again, and he had Duran in trouble. Duran was bravely battling back on instinct, and then the hitman landed a devastating right-hand bomb. Duran was down, and he was out. The fight was over. Referee Carlos Padilla called a halt to the contest, and it was officially a second-round technical knockout for the champion. Tommy the Hitman Hearns had just successfully defended the WBC Super Welterweight Championship of the World. On April 15th, 1985, undisputed middleweight champion of the world, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, squared off against former two-division champion, Thomas the Hitman Hearns. This was a highly anticipated mega bout showdown. Tommy was looking to become a three-division world champion, and Hagler was still looking to command the respect and recognition that his considerable talents had deserved. The atmosphere was intense, and Hagler and Hearns stared coldly at one another as referee Richard Steele was providing his pre-fight instructions. When the action got underway, there was an almost immediate explosion of fireworks. Hagler was coming in to attack, and Hearns clipped him with a good shot that ignited an incredible exchange that saw the hitman land a number of good right hands. Hagler was hurt, and he grabbed on to stop the assault. When action resumed, Hearns tried to press his advantage, and he fired off some hard shots from long range. But then Hagler charged in low like a bull, and he tagged Hearns with a couple of really nice left hooks. And then all hell broke loose. Hearns then started pedaling away, trying to keep the champion at long range, but Hagler continued pressing forward, looking to pounce. Hagler eventually managed to get Hearns pinned in the corner, and he had no intentions of letting him out. Marvelous began firing away in tight quarters as the two boxers exchanged punches while maneuvering for position. Hagler was doing a good job of smothering Tommy's punches, but Hearns eventually was able to fight his way out of the corner, and this led to another explosive exchange that saw both boxers swinging for the fences. They fiercely battled it out until the bell sounded to end the terrific first round. Hearns started boxing more to begin round two. The challenger was bouncing around and using movement to try to keep the action at a distance where he could fire off a long jab. Hagler was stalking Hearns and pressing forward relentlessly, but Tommy was doing an excellent job boxing off the back foot and keeping Hagler at arm's length. Marvin was still finding the range to land some isolated shots, but Hearns was doing a good job using his jab and moving away. But Hagler was eventually able to close the gap, and when he did some very good work on the inside. The trend of Hearns boxing from range and Hagler stalking continued in round 3. The referee briefly halted the action so a doctor could examine a cut on Hagler's eye, and when action resumed, the Marvelous One had a renewed sense of urgency. Hagler was fiercely charging after Hearns, and he nailed him with a big right hand that had Hearns stumbling around. Tommy smiled at Marvin, and Hagler went all out. Another big right sent the hitman timbering down, and he was badly hurt. Hearns slowly but bravely rose to his feet, but referee Richard Steele didn't like what he saw, and he called a halt to the contest. It was officially a third-round technical knockout for the champion. Marvelous Marvin Hagler had just successfully defended the undisputed middleweight championship of the world. On April 6, 1987, WBC middleweight champion of the world, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, squared off against former two-division world champion Sugar Ray Leonard. It was a matchup boxing fans had long desired and debated theoretically for years, and the highly anticipated showdown was finally happening. Leonard was coming back from his second retirement, having only fought once in the previous 5 years, and Hagler was looking to make his 13th title defense, which would leave him just one shy of the all-time record of 14 held by Carlos Monzon. The fight started off tactically with Leonard dancing around and moving on the outside, while Hagler was pressing forward and trying to close the distance. Leonard was firing off some jabs and the occasional quick combo, and he was doing a good job keeping away from Hagler. Leonard was exhibiting good defense, and to the surprise of many, Hagler was fighting very conservatively in the early going, and this seemed to be playing in Ray's favor. Leonard was boxing very effectively and using some sneaky quick attacks whenever he found openings, and this was keeping Hagler off balance. Hagler started fighting much more effectively during the middle rounds. The Marvelous One was doing a better job of cutting off the ring and closing the distance, and he was able to pin Leonard up against the ropes more frequently. Hagler was doing some of his very best work when he had Ray pinned, but Leonard often fired back off the ropes with some good fast work of his own. Leonard started clinching more when Hagler was getting inside, and Leonard was fighting more flat-footed than he had been earlier. This led to some more spirited but brief exchanges between the two. Hagler did some excellent work and unleashed a vicious assault with Ray pinned in the corner. Marvin was landing big, hard, clubbing shots that were thudding off of Leonard everywhere. Hagler continued peppering him and chopping away, and he was landing some very hurtful blows. Leonard looked exhausted, but somehow he managed to string together a nice fast flurry that enabled him to fight his way off the ropes. This led to a barrage of back and forth action that included several mini shifts in momentum. The heart and determination of both combatants was on full display. Things were close and competitive in the later portions of the fight, where each boxer was having his moments. Leonard was trying to keep Hagler in the center of the ring, and Hagler was looking to close the distance to get an optimal punching range. Leonard began showboating and taunting Hagler in the championship rounds, and the fight fittingly ended with both fighters battling it out to the finish. At the conclusion of round 12, both boxers optimistically raised their hands in triumph. When the final verdict was announced, Leonard was awarded a split decision victory. Two of the judges scored the bout for Leonard by scores of 118 to 110 and 115 to 113. The dissenting judge had the bout for Hagler 115 to 113. It was a close and competitive contest that resulted in one of the most highly debated decisions in boxing history, and it still remains a matter of heated debate to this very day. Sugar Ray Leonard had just become the new WBC middleweight champion of the world, making him a 3-division champion in the process. On June 12, 1989, WBC super middleweight champion of the world Sugar Ray Leonard squared off against WBO super middleweight world champion Thomas Hearns. The highly anticipated rematch took place almost 8 years after their epic first encounter, and 3 weight classes north of their initial meeting at welterweight. Early in the fight, the two boxers had a customary feeling out process, and this was eerily similar to what we saw in the opening stages of their first bout. Leonard was up on his toes dancing around, and Hearns was patiently stalking him. Hearns once again took command early and controlled the action with a long, accurate jab. In the third round, Leonard began having some more success with his own jab, and he started opening up a little bit. But then Tommy caught him with a big counter overhand right that rocked Leonard. Ray looked wobbly, and Hearns patiently strided in, and he landed another short right hand that had Leonard down. Ray beat the count, and Hearns was cool and methodical in his follow-up assaults, fighting intelligently and keeping his composure. Leonard persevered and appeared to have his legs back. The two continued competitively battling it out, and there were several shifts in momentum. Leonard was coming on strong in the early portions of the middle rounds, and then Hearns regained control during the later portions of the middle rounds. But Leonard would turn the tides again. Many of the patterns that emerged in their first encounter were once again resurfacing here, and Leonard started coming on strong. In round 11, Hearns looked rejuvenated, and he was jabbing and landing better than he had been in some time. The hitman then unloaded a series of well-placed booming right hands that sent Leonard down for the second time in the contest. Leonard rose to his feet, and he seemed to recover quickly. The two resumed trading away with some heated bursts of action. But Leonard was doing the better work down the stretch, and he finished the fight strong. When the final verdict was announced, the fight was ruled a draw. One judge had it 113 to 112 for Hearns, another had it 113 to 112 for Leonard, and the third and final judge had it 112 apiece. This was a controversial decision that most observers felt Hearns had deserved to win. But officially it was declared a draw, so Leonard and Hearns each kept their respective titles. On December 7th, 1989, WBC super middleweight champion of the world, Sugar Ray Leonard, squared off against longtime rival and former 4-division world champion, Roberto Duran. It was kind of fitting that this rubber match, which took place almost 9 years after their second encounter, was the final matchup among members of the Fab Four. It all started with Leonard versus Duran to kick off the 1980s, and it ultimately ended with Leonard versus Duran again to conclude the 1980s. Unfortunately, however, the fight turned out to be disappointing. At this point in time, Leonard and Duran were both far removed from their primes, but Sugar Ray still had far more left in the tank at this point. This resulted in a lackluster tactical affair, where Leonard used good lateral movement to control the action and neutralize Duran throughout the 12-round contest. Leonard was awarded a lopsided unanimous decision victory, where the official judges had it 120 to 110, 119 to 109, and 116 to 111, all in favor of the champion. Sugar Ray Leonard had just successfully defended the WBC Super Middleweight Championship of the World. Roberto Duran, Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Marvin Hagler. 4 Hall of Fame boxers. 4 of the very best boxers in the long, rich history of professional boxing. And 4 of the greatest champions who competed during the talented, rich 1980s. Fate dealt boxing fans a great hand during the 1980s. Indeed, boxing fans from the 80s were truly blessed.